Welcome. You are here today with Bobby and Graham. We appreciate y'all tuning in. Graham, good afternoon. How's it going?
Good. Doing well. What about yourself?
Wonderful. Well, we can go ahead and jump in and kick it off here. We got a nice little list of topics that we're going to be talking about. We shared these online just
Awesome.
on Twitter, and we're streaming on X. We're streaming on X, LinkedIn,
Yeah.
and we're on Facebook. Believe it or not, we're hoping to see some education on there to some folks. But we'll go ahead and dive right in. The first thing we had on the docket to discuss this week was actually the Bitwise ETF, and they're leveraging Hoseki for proof of reserves. But wanted to kind of hear your thoughts on that, Graham, because proof of reserves for not only Bitcoin ETF issuers, but also those using Lightning in the future is going to be important. But I'm curious to hear about this proof of reserves announcement and what kind of impact you feel that might have on the adoption of Bitcoin here in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's awesome to see, especially because proof of reserves is always something that is very interesting for like exchanges. People have been pushing exchanges to do like this proof of reserves for a while, which I think makes a lot of sense. For I guess maybe to define that a little bit, basically having a system for these exchanges to show you kind of what is the on-chain address that is holding kind of the funds of the exchange. So proving that they are not rehypothecating your funds and like doing a bunch of shady stuff behind the scenes like FTX was. So kind of proving, hey, when I deposit money into it, this is where it sits. I know that it's there. People have been pushing exchanges to do that for a while. The Bitwise was the first ETF to do that as well, which I think is great. Like I think it's great to see happen because it shows kind of, it's almost like proving kind of the how they understand how the system of Bitcoin works. That they want to be kind of true participants, true kind of believers in like in the protocol itself, and show that they are kind of doing what they say. So I think that is fantastic from that perspective. I think they've gotten a little bit of flack when they announced it because the address that they are using to hold the funds is a legacy address that is very, very likely a single sig address. So I don't know the current balance of that address today, but it is a very large sum of money, very large amount of Bitcoin. Yeah, do you know what it is,
So
Bobby?
no, I don't. But question on that front, I saw people
Yeah.
arguing like it's a single sig account, but it's offline multi-sig, and I'm not privy to all of this, but do you know what all that means? Can you break that down for kind of folks who are like, what the hell does all this mean?
Yeah, like so the basically the address format that they are using is one that is like kind of depreciated in favor of much newer addresses that like support like Taproot or SegWit or any of those things. And so basically it's an address that's kind of like old that's not really recommended for use maybe anymore. But I think that the people that are saying that it's maybe not so bad is that I think that they custody with Coinbase, which a lot of the ETF filers custody with Coinbase. And so there's probably a lot more going on behind the scenes of like how they actually secure that than it's not just like, hey, some Bitwise employee has like this in like a password manager or something like that. There's probably a lot more going on behind the scenes to have the security. So I think that that's very likely. I think that to FUD that they are have this a very insecure wallet that's storing all ETF funds is like I don't think that's totally accurate. So I think that there's probably more going on behind the scenes, but that's kind of the viewpoint that people have is that you're using this old address that is likely single sig and all of these things. So I think there's both arguments about it. So like overall, fantastic for an ETF filer to do this kind of proof of reserves system. It's I think it goes to show if you ever want to have like holes poked in what you're doing, announce it to Bitcoin Twitter, and they're gonna like poke holes like everywhere that they possibly can.
That is true. I kind of love that about Twitter. Sometimes it's like it kind of drives you crazy how much people argue, but at the same time, it does kind of filter stuff in really a good way and creates a lot of dialogue. Very good.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
all right. Before we kind of move on, I did want to ask proof of reserves for Lightning. Has there been
Oh yeah.
questions or thoughts from Enterprise in regards to that? Because obviously, and I'll just kind of share some of my thoughts. I know nodes are interesting because the last thing organization wants to do is be funneling funds for someone in North Korea. If you're an American company, you're trying to abide by laws, but proof of reserves and some of these legal risks, like what role does that play maybe for Lightning companies over the coming year or two as people start to use Lightning payments?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be like similarly as important, just because, like, if you're trying to do proof of reserves for an exchange, whatever it is, and you have a growing amount of Bitcoin that is in the Lightning Network, that's kind of not seen on the normal balance sheet of like your on holding. So I think that doing things like proof of reserves inside of Lightning makes a lot of sense. It's a little weird because, like, Binance has like a node that's public on the Lightning Network that you can see, has public channels, but they also have a bunch of private channels too. And so how do there's kind of a trade-off with privacy of like, okay, well, are you disclosing some of the information that is supposed to be kept private inside of the Lightning Network? So I think it'll be a
Mhm.
really interesting thing that's going to evolve. I think it's a little challenging to do today. No one really does it today, and there's also, frankly, not a lot of exchanges that do proof of reserves today. So very early in the adoption of that, but I think it will be something interesting. And I think with advancements of the tech too, you might be able to show some proof of reserves without actually disclosing all of like your private channels or something like that. I haven't totally thought that through, but
Yeah.
it wouldn't be surprised if some possibilities evolve over time.
Yeah. Very cool. So you guys keep sending Bitcoin to the address because apparently they're using it to cover the fees for the customers. So they're happy. They're like, oh, they're all just
Yeah.
donating. That's wonderful. um,
Yes. Yeah.
all right. So moving on here, cruising along. Got something cool here to share. Saw this announcement this last week. I don't know if there's a good way to zoom in, but this group here, Volpum Ventures, they shared about Banko, a trading protocol that facilitates non-interactive swaps among two or more parties. So folks maybe who aren't engineers or like super into like trading and swaps, can you maybe explain like what this is and why this is meaningful or important maybe for broader Bitcoin adoption?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting. It's really cool to see. So the kind of what I think that they're trying to solve here is that normal swaps that have to happen today, so like coin joins or even some like Lightning, like submarine swaps and things like that, are usually very interactive. Meaning that, hey, if I'm gonna swap with like a provider, I have to be online and participating in the transactions and doing all of those things. This is a way of doing it in a non-interactive way, so you can kind of you can think of it like in very much in like side of Lightning. It's interactive in that you send a transaction and the other person has to be online to receive. On layer one Bitcoin, that doesn't have to happen. You just have an address and you can just send to it at any time. This is sort of creating that UX of just like on-chain sending of Bitcoin. So you don't have to be online to like be kind of participants in this whole like swap service. So it's really nice just from a UX perspective. I think that that's kind of the experience that people want to see as they use Bitcoin is like much more, the less interactivity, the better, I think, just generally speaking. And I think Volpin Ventures is building this on things like Liquid. And so I think it's also interesting to see how things are going to be. We're seeing more and more experimentation with things like side chains and whatnot, which is very
Mhm.
interesting as far as the ability to decrease some of that interactivity or like reduce fees and some of those things. So maybe not everyone loves Liquid on like at face value, but I think as we use it for, hey, maybe it's a great thing to do some swaps, and then you just go in and out of like Bitcoin in the Lightning Network or on chain, and you just touch Liquid for just a little bit. I think that those get increasingly more interesting as we can do some like experimentation inside of that. So I think it's great to see. Again, it's just overall, it's some experimentation where we can increase the user experience of Bitcoin, which is always a great thing.
Yeah. Interesting. Good deal. Okay. Well, would we really be discussing Bitcoin if we didn't say something about the ETF? So let's share this again. This is
Mhm.
James. For those who don't maybe know him, he's one of two folks who are covering the Bitcoin ETF. And as of last week, BlackRock was purchasing more than GBTC Grayscale, like higher flows. And this appears to be going on still as of 33 minutes ago. And I don't know if this is why the price is being bid up specifically. I'm not the type of person who tries to understand where every penny is going and why the price is moving. Just kind of focus on what I need to do in my day to day. But this has to be a good sign, right? Like, what does this mean in your mind, and what's this signaling to the market? Positive flows.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's just showing increased interest and activity inside of the ETF, especially like what are we, 12 days out or so, and so To see these kinds of inflows like still happening, I think is very, very bullish. Like even if it's not like, hey, we're not at 60K Bitcoin yet, I think it's still super bullish for that perspective. And a lot over the last like week or so, a lot of the kind of the outflows from GPTC are from things like FTX, like creditors and their whole kind of settlement that's going on there and all those things. And so for us to kind of absorb that like the way that we have and then see this continued inflow, I think is very, very positive. And I think that, again, I think it's super bullish to be having these kinds of inflows like this far out. I think we all expected huge amounts of inflows the first couple days of the ETF, but now this is old news by now in Bitcoin land. So ETF's old news, but we're still seeing this huge amount of interest. So I think it's going to continue. I think it's going to be really interesting to watch.
Yeah, and the one thing I know folks who were talking about this over the last couple of weeks is it takes a lot of time for these money managers to be caught up, gone through training, to be able to explain it to people. And if you're managing a book of business, it's not uncommon to have potentially 100, 150 people you're managing money for, maybe more. Like a lot of folks, especially high net worth individuals, they're hands off. It's like the classic, the customer that pays you $100, they're going to nitpick you. The person who has $1 million, they're like, we trust you, go do it. So it'll be interesting over the next 60 days, 90 days, what happens, but definitely looking good.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's the people that are in it now are more of the early adopters. Like, who was the like 401k provider that like didn't allow you to buy like Bitcoin?
That was oh my gosh.
I don't remember.
Someone
Either way,
in the
there's
chat.
we
got the chat. Somebody drop it in the chat. Y'all know what this is. But
there's some people that prevent you from still like interacting with the ETFs because it's Bitcoin and things like that.
It's
so
the
I think
ship.
we're
Vanguard. Is it Vanguard? It's the ship.
That sounds better. So like I'll also say we're early that people are still like, hey, we don't want to touch this, money laundering, like all those things where they're like, not allowing you to buy it. So I think that to see the inflows with, still some people that maybe don't understand it from an investment perspective, I think it's bullish.
I think it's funny every time they talk about criminals getting caught, politicians. Yeah, thank you, Zach. It was Vanguard. Pierre's like, I bet they weren't using Bitcoin for their laundering. Like, what did they do to like pay off other politicians to get what they wanted? They said, why didn't they use Bitcoin? Pierre's so funny in the chat.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
All right.
Love to see it.
Oh man, cool. Well, cruising along, we've got some more fun money movement technology happening here on Bitcoin. I'm going to move over to this new tab here, but Graham, you probably know how to pronunciate the name. I don't know if it's 10.10.1 or 101.01, but self-custodial Bitcoin perps.
Yeah. It's pronounced 10.10.1. These guys went through the Wolf Accelerator. And they've been building, like kind of self-custodial perpetual swaps with, DLCs and all those things. So I feel like this kind of went a little bit under the radar for how much, like these guys are working on some really cool stuff. And so I think that they had a new release that enable some new things that they're calling like DLC channels, which I think are kind of an adaptation of like Lightning channels, but I think that they behave a little bit differently. I think you don't have to worry about forced closes and things like that. So ultimately, I think it's very interesting to see the further development of things like DLCs and non-custodial swaps, perpetual swaps, and things like that on top of Bitcoin. So I wanted to call this out because I think it's super interesting to see people still advancing these kinds of things. Because I heard about DLCs probably in like 2016 or so. And it's kind of one of those things where it was like talked about, like it's going to do so many things. I think it still can do so many things. We've just seen it's just been very slow. Like people talk about Lightning being slow to adoption. I think DLCs are even further in kind of their slowness just because there's not as many people working on it. But it's great to see some people actually focusing on DLCs, building out a lot of functionality around them. So I think it's great to see. I think that the 10.10.1 is not available in the US, so I haven't been able to really test it yet. But anyone that is outside the US, I highly recommend downloading it, testing it out, seeing what you think, and I mean, let the team know of any feedback.
Right on. Very cool. All right. Well, then I think this is going to be one of the hottest topics over the next 2 years, especially as money gets deployed in VC land and it starts picking up. But Lightning and AI, and we have to say this: Zuck's goat is named Bitcoin or Satoshi or something like that, and he
Is it
just
really?
bought. Yeah, and I think
I
he
didn't know
bought
that.
like 300,000 or 600,000 Nvidia chips for their AI stuff they're doing, and he said they're going to open source all of it. So one side of me
Hmm.
wonders, like, his goat's name is Bitcoin. Is he going to be using the Lightning Network for some of the AI stuff he's doing? Like, I don't know, but Lightning and AI,
Yeah.
like, why does this matter? Like, from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of been talked about for a while. Like, I feel like AI and Lightning kind of comes and goes, and it kind of started with like there is some like a hackathon for like AI for all that was last year that did a lot of kind of experimentation around it. But like ultimately, why do these things converge? The big thing, and this is something that the Planeteers I think CEO said in an interview on CNBC last week. I think we'll have to link to that, but basically in these kinds of new systems like AI and this whole like agent world of specifically kind of programmed systems to do specific tasks, they need a way of kind of communicating and paying for the services that they're doing, both from a consumption base, from a consumer paying for like the compute time that they are using inside of like an AI host, as well as the actual systems themselves doing their own kind of like settlement of what the kind of resources that they're using. So there's no better system for internet native settlement than Lightning. And so people see that there's obviously going to be this big, there's going to be a big need for these AI systems to have a form of money that they can use to settle up with. And I think it's very obvious that Lightning will be that solution, because you think about using any other technology, any other blockchain, even call it Solana or anything that's like fast. It's still not as fast as Lightning. You still can't do as many transactions per second as you can with Lightning. And there's so much built into the Lightning protocol itself already with like L402 and the implementations themselves, giving like agents budgets and all these things that already exist. It's just prime for the systems inside of AI to leverage Bitcoin and Lightning to facilitate their transactions. So when you think about how like the only internet native currency that exists that makes sense for these things to interact with is Lightning. And so that's why I think a lot of people, ourselves included, are very interested in kind of how AI and Lightning overlap and what that can enable for service providers.
Gotcha. I'm curious from your perspective because right now, like the main model or platform that people are using is Chat GPT. There's a lot of
Mhm.
specifically made ones like Alex Svetsky's like trying to make the Bitcoin AI like tool to ask it questions and learn. And I've seen a couple from like a marketing and brand perspective. Their whole pitch is, we will speak in the voice of your brand, use our AI. That's our value prop. We don't make it sound robotic. And I also think like there's obviously going to be AIs where one's like if you're a car mechanic, use it to get the best answers. There's all these different specialized ones. Like what if there's like this chicken and egg problem of AIs, is it going to be like some of the first use cases will be like these specialized AIs that like write social content and then it pushes that data into Hootsuite and makes it more efficient for like scheduling social, or is it going to be for doing research and long form writing where it's like, hey, you work in this field but you've got these 8 specific AIs that need to tap into each other constantly that are better trained, and then it yields a result. Like there's going to be a way it needs to be done
Mhm.
first before everyone potentially uses it. And maybe I'm convoluting this, but what do you think is the prerequisite? Are we going to need to see more of these kind of like micro AIs that do one specific task and that become like commonplace, or is that not a requirement for L402 to be adopted? Like hopefully I asked that question well.
I think I get what you're saying. I don't think that it's a requirement for L402 to be adopted, especially so like I think in the way that L402 I think will be very, very interesting is in like, provisioning for like API capacities and things like that. So like Sulu Solutions is like creating kind of a layer that helps like really simplify L402, which is a fantastic product that everyone
And
should
you're
go check
you're
out.
even you're speaking like APIs. You're not even referring to like LLMs in general, but just like paying for API calls, like a separate use case.
Yeah, correct. And that's where I think L402 can like shine in the most immediate term.
There you go.
And then additionally, Yeah, I think that like LLMs kind of communicating between themselves. So like that's what that you're right. ChatGPT is very a large provider today for a lot of AI things, but they're going to be a lot of these kinds of like ancillary AI agents and things like that that kind of augment the data or systems that ChatGPT kind of use. And so settlement kind of between these in the back end is where I see a lot of those services being developed and used. I think it's similar to like the way that I see more broad scale Lightning adoption happening in like traditional finances on the back end for an efficiency gain. Decreasing time to settlement, having cheaper fees, all these things. I think that it definitely applies in the world of AI too, where it's not like, hey, if I'm writing an application that is trying to just, use Chat GPT for like, my website or something, maybe that's not the first use case. It's kind of further down the line, further behind the scenes for these like, different providers that are providing AI services that are actually leveraging several different things on the back end. So you can kind of keep a tighter control around some of those systems.
Got it. And one last question before, I know we're getting close to wrapping up here. For folks that want to use L402 for API calls, they obviously might not want to touch Bitcoin due to volatility. Even if they said, hey, let's allocate 100 grand a month and just deal with the 2 to 3% monthly moving in price or whatever. Is stable coins on Lightning almost like a requirement in the minds of a normal institution, because they're just like, we don't want to deal with the fluctuations? Like once there's ability for like stable coins on Lightning to manage these API calls, is that kind of like the floodgates opening, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely helps. I think that there's a lot of more, yeah, like the traditional kind of financial service providers that maybe are not as comfortable holding like a balance of Bitcoin and like these agents to like go and the volatility risk, all of those things. And so I think that stable coins on Lightning would definitely be approachable for a lot more folks than maybe just native Bitcoin is today. So I think that it doesn't hurt the adoption. I think that it'll help enable a lot more people kind of coming into it because they have like a dollar denominated system. Because like, at the end of the day, all of their bills, all of their systems are dollar denominated. So it's kind of, if they can kind of be right in line with the rest of their balance sheet, their accounting department's much happier, like their compliance team's probably happier, all of those things. So I think that it definitely does help and enable a lot more adoption to happen after that.
Cool. All right. Well, good deal. I think we're probably at about time. We've shared, this is going to be community driven. So thank you, James, Jose, Zach, for chiming in here today. And if you ever want to hear things talked about, feel free to drop it in the chat, whether on X, YouTube, or if you're on Facebook. But yeah, Graham, any just final thoughts or words or feedback from the first 2 weeks of doing this?
No, I mean, yeah. Thanks for those listening. Definitely feel free to shoot us ideas for what you want us to kind of talk about. Any current happenings inside of Bitcoin. We definitely want to cover the relevant topics, and hopefully, I mean, ultimately, the goal of this is to help you all understand kind of the current happenings, stay up to date, know what's going on, and have a more informed kind of view of the market. And so, give us feedback. Let us know what you want to hear, and we'll definitely be able to incorporate it in.
All right. And thank you, Kevin, for asking what about XRP earlier, joking around. We appreciate you, Kevin. All right, guys. Until next week, stay tuned. We'll get it scheduled out and kick your ideas over. We appreciate you for tuning in.